invest in ourselves. We all shine. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Balanced Life with Dr. Jacquie here at Black Star Network. And you guessed it, it is Election Day. Across the country, everyone is figuring out how they're going to cast their ballot. But let me just say, getting to the polls is not always as easy as it seems. Sometimes we're stressed, there's anxiety, trying to discover not only who we're going to vote for, but do we have all the documents, the resources? Have we read the pamphlets? Do we know what the issues are? Today, our guests, Pastor J.T. Johnson and Dr. Tierney, we're going to talk about some of the stresses and anxieties and the polarization that is happening around the globe as people are casting their vote, but here specifically here in the United States. Hey, everyone.
Hey, Dr. Jacquie.
Hey, welcome. Let me tell you, this day is Election Day, and some people, did the thing. They voted early. I've seen stickers on people's shirts, on their handbags, on their briefcases. People are putting on their social media that they voted. They got their cute little Instagram and Facebook frames saying that they have already registered to vote, that they have gone to the polls and cast their vote. Yes. And then there are those people who do by mail. They send it in as an absentee ballot, but then there are the people who are going to get up early in the morning. They're going to stand in the lines and they're going to go out there. Let's talk a little bit about all the anxiety attached to voting. Pastor JT, what is it about going to the polls to cast a ballot that literally puts people in a tailspin?
And thank you, Dr. Jacquie, for having this conversation on this day, because as you mentioned, this is probably one of the most contentious elections that's happening nationwide. And I think that anxiety comes just because of the weight of the day. If you've been listening to your news, you've been reading any type of publications, probably you have been seeing probably unsolicited ads from certain candidates. You have been bombarded. And two, you just have a pulse of what's going on in society. That anxiety rises from day to day to day, and then the day comes. So we're talking about before you even get to the polling location, there is already a significant amount of anxiety that has already built. So then when you get to the polling location, God forbid if there's a long line, depending on where you are in the country, if it's hot outside, if it's raining, if it's freezing cold, you don't even know. And then not to mention driving up to the polling location and you have 99 people coming trying to give you postcards and slicks and pamphlets right there at that time. Surprisingly, nobody just passed out from information overload. So that anxiety is an amazing one, but it can negatively impact the voter, especially that voter that does not show up to the polls as an educated, prepared voter.
An educated, prepared voter. You mentioned something, literally I get calls from towns that I didn't even know existed. As we've gotten into this election process, there's this bombardment of phone calls, wanting to share information. And you said that information overload. Dr. Tierney, talk to us about that a little bit, because even in your space and in your state, and we know we'll talk about that a little later, how states are impacted, but talk to us about that inability to manage anxiety. And I'm going to give you one specific question, because there are people who do have crowd anxiety and, all of those things. So talk to us about that.
So out the gate, what I have to say is no matter the method that you choose to vote, it's just important that you do vote. I have voted early voting, absentee ballot when I was in college. I actually like going on the day of, because even if it's a long line, just the rush and the buzz that I get from being at a polling station and casting my vote and doing what my ancestors fought to be able to do, it invigorates me. But that's not the case for everyone, and so when we're talking about managing the information overload or the anxiety that comes with the voting process, you have to do what's best for you. So one of the things that I actually like to do in the beginning stages where there's a lot of text messages, a lot of information, I tend to kind of put horse blinders on until about a week before I'm getting ready to vote. Then that's when I actually pull up the candidates, look at each candidate, look at their platforms, get the information and choose who I'm voting for so that when I go to the polling station, I already have a list of who I'm voting for. Some people, it may work for you that you go there that day and, as Pastor JT said, get the information right then, the handouts and the pamphlets, and kind of make your decision at that point. For some people, it might be better to do the early voting or the absentee ballot. So that way you're avoiding the crowds, you're getting a jump on everything, you're getting that information to you early and go ahead and getting it done. But the main thing is that you have to identify what makes you anxious, what makes you to feel overwhelmed. Is it the crowds? Is it the information? And then picking your method that best mitigates that for you.
Mitigating circumstances are always very interesting when it comes to the poll. And before we go into our break, I want to have a bit of a conversation about these modern day poll tax methods. Because individuals who can't find their social security card, people who may have moved within the voting period or since they registered, individuals who don't know where their driver's license, heaven forbid you were born before birth certificates and driver's license were ever a thing. How do we help people, even in this moment, get those documents? Because this isn't going to be the last election that happens. There's quite a few more before we ever get to the presidential election. So what should it look like for people in this preparation phase? Pastor JT.
Right. And big shout out to anybody that's online now that is motivated to go vote, as Dr. Jacquie said, that was born before driver's license and birth certificates, because you have been doing this a long time. But I will say this. It's just about having the willingness, or I believe the urge to want to have your voice heard, and knowing, as Dr. Tierney said, all of the fights that happened with our forefathers and our foremothers who sacrificed for us to be able to go out and vote. I believe now we have to have that same, if not even more, push to go out to the polls, because to your point, Dr. Jacquie, there are so many new tactics that are being put in place to suppress our vote, or to maybe add so many different steps that we lose the motivation to want to even go out. So what I suggest is to identify what's needed in between election time. Because oftentimes before, you may run into a situation where you don't even have enough time to get the documents that you need. So even if you're on right now, and God forbid you aren't able to cast your vote in this election because maybe, to Dr. Jackie's point, you showed up and you moved, and maybe you didn't update your address information, or maybe you didn't bring the proper documentation, and then when you get there, the line is closed or it's done for the day. I don't want you to feel like you won't even pursue it for the next election, because one thing that's going to happen in the United States of America, I pray that we continue to be a country that's based on democracy. And if that is the case, there will always be elections, and there will always be a time for you to vote. So if by chance there was a piece of information that you didn't have, there was a certain document that you didn't have, and it prohibited you from being able to vote in this cycle, please ensure that that information is in your hands months prior to the next election, so your voice can be heard.
Absolutely. Dr. Tierney.
Mm-hmm. So this is where I have to bring up our good friend Google. We use Google for everything else. So let's make sure that we're using Google here when it's time to go to the polls. Just a quick Google, as we've stated, it's different state by state. So just going to Google, and you don't even have to know the website. You don't have to know all the things, but just Googling something simple like, what do I need to vote in California, North Carolina, Texas, or what, wherever you may be. And it will pull up all the information for you. Googling who are the candidates, in your state, and it will pull everything up for you. So I don't want you to feel like this is just an arduous task where you have to go through a bunch of changes to find this information, or I don't know the website to go to, so I don't have the information. Just go to Google, type in whatever it is that comes to your mind. And I promise you, Google will pull it up and the information will be right there for you.
Absolutely. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk for a minute about what's on your ballot. If you are thinking about going to the polls today, which we do highly recommend that you get out and cast your vote. It is your right and your voice matters. You can go to vote411.org. That is vote411.org to find out what's at stake in your state. When we're back after the break, we're going to talk about what's on your ballot.
Know your rights before you vote. If you have any questions or a problem voting, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE. For more information, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
I am Letitia Hill Gadet, owner of Ottendorf Laboratories. In America, our freedom of speech and the right to peacefully protest is a wonderful thing, but faith without works is dead. Will you take souls to the polls? If you don't vote, all of your activities were done in vain. I am an ordained minister, a presiding elder in the AME Zion Church, a wife, a mother. I am spending my time and my resources to encourage you to vote.
Paid for by Ottendorf Laboratories.
We've got to stand up. Republicans are banning abortion rights, tearing down democracy, blocking progress. But when Democrats stand together, we win. Because we voted, Democrats stood up for Black lives, voting to ban police chokeholds, stood up for Black women, putting one on the Supreme Court, stood up for our families, lowering cost of health care and prescriptions and capping insulin, and stood up for millions by slashing student debt. This November, let's stand up together and keep making progress.
When we invest in ourselves, we're investing in what's next for all of us. Growing, creating, making moves that move us all forward. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, today is the day. It's election day, and it's not too late to get out and vote. So we want to give you the information that is needed for you to be able to figure out not only what the issues are in your state, in your county, your local area, but also how do you get to where you need to be? What resources and documents do you need? I'm going to ask this question to Pastor JT first, because I know in the state of Texas, we're always some shade of purple. First we were red, then we were blue. Now we're back to being purple again. And so knowing what's on your ballot can literally help you identify and understand the best way to cast your vote. Pastor JT, let's talk about that for a moment. What's happening in the state of Texas?
Wow. Do we have enough time for that? Texas, as the young people are now saying, they're putting an ing on everything. So like the math ain't mathing. I hear that a lot. I'll just say Texas is out here Texaning. We are being who we have always been. Problematic. Wow. We are in a very contentious space in the place of Texas. And I will say that this is probably one of the most important elections that we have had in Texas history, because we are from the top, we are looking at a governor's race. And now I'm not going to take this opportunity to speak on any candidate, but I will say that there are in the state of Texas, if you think about far left and far right, the candidates that are running actually represent those groups that they are running, and they represent them well. And so in this particular race, if there are things that we have heard across the country that have been hot topics, I know abortion in the state of Texas, immigration, education. We've even gotten to this place where we're having this discussion about our history books and what they're calling CRT, critical race theory. That's something that we are talking about in this election. These hot button topics that you have been seeing on your major news stations, it is inflammatory in the state of Texas. And the reason why: the state of Texas houses the largest number of African Americans across the country. Let me say that one more time. The state of Texas houses the largest amount of African Americans across the country. So the reason why this election is so important for us is because what happens in Texas, there are 49 other states in the union that's watching to see what's going to happen in Texas today. So they believe if Texas decides that this is the way that they're going to go, this is the way that the United States is going to go. And just from my personal opinion, as for me and my house, there are some things that they are attempting to enact and put into legislative law that I cannot sit idly by and allow to happen, because it's going to negatively impact my children, children's children, and generations to come. And that's the reason why I believe that midterm elections are so important. Because if you're listening to me today and maybe you are on the fence about going to go and vote, please hear me. If you're in Texas, you're in California, you're in Georgia, you're in North Carolina, I don't care if you're in Alaska, midterm elections are so important is because these are the elections that control your state, your local municipalities, your cities, your counties. These are the elections that get the right representation on school boards for your kids. These are the elections that get the judges in the seats that are going to either be fighting for us or fighting against us. These are even the elections that determine if they're going to spend money to invest in fixing potholes in your community. Who's going to be over the water in your city? This is what governs your town. And I believe because we have been so focused on what happens on Pennsylvania Avenue, we miss the opportunity for our voice to be heard in the cities that we reside. As I will be honest, and I have always said, Pennsylvania Avenue has nothing to do with me and Houston, Texas, because at the end of the day, there is a local government that governs everything here. And if you are not voting and your voice is not being heard here, you now impair the voice that will come from the White House, because that voice from the White House is buffered by the local ordinances, the state ordinances that have been put in place. And I'll say this, and I think the pastor coming out of me, I think I've closed 5 times in this segment. but I'll say this: if you're not going to vote, your voice tomorrow does not count. So being on a soapbox tomorrow and next Wednesday at the beauty shop, at the barber shop, in December, in February of 23, if you are not being a part of the political process, your voice now becomes chatter instead of challenging the status quo.
That's absolutely right. So what Pastor JT just described in very vivid ways is what's called civic engagement or civic participation. And that is the individual's ability to get out to vote to impact local, state, and national voting and legislation. And so we have to all be engaged in that process. So Dr. T, what's on the ballot in North Carolina?
I mean, coming after the good pastor, he pretty much really summed it up what's here at stake here in North Carolina as well, and said many of the same points that I was going to make. So right now, the hot buttons in North Carolina are the NC legislature. So we're not sure who's going to hold the legislature. Will it be the Democrats? Will it be the Republicans? Right now, that's a big topic of conversation. The next topic is inflation. which is something that is impacting pretty much every state here in the US. And the third hot button topic is abortion. And so right now, North Carolina is really up in the air. Now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, North Carolina is up in the air in terms of which side of the fence is going to fall on in terms of abortions being illegal, or if they will continue to protect a woman's right to choose, you know. And so I love what Pastor JT just stated, because that's exactly where I was going to go with it in terms of making this real, you know, for your everyday. So a lot of people that I talk to that are hesitant about voting or say, well, it don't matter because they're going to do whatever they want to do anyway, don't realize that your choice to not vote is a vote for the opposition. You know, whatever you see as the opposition, you've basically just voted for them because you did not vote for whatever matters for you. You did not let your voice be heard, you know. And so when we hear these big topics, you know, inflation, okay, let's make that real. You tired of how much the chicken wings cost when you go to the grocery store? Well, you need to get out and vote. You know, abortion. Do you, as if you are a female or if you have a mother, a sister, a friend that you care about, do you want her to be able to choose what happens to her body? Yes. Okay. Well, then you need to go ahead and vote, you know. And so making these topics real every day, that they impact your everyday life. This is why you must vote. This is why you must persevere if the lines are long. This is why you must go back. You know, if they say, oh, you need your social security card or this, okay, I'll be right back. I'll go home and grab it and come right back. You know, this is why it's so important that we vote, and particularly in the midterms, because these are the officials that will be governing just our day-to-day in our everyday life in our states and in our cities. So absolutely, please go vote.
These are the everyday matters. And, you know, as we're preparing to wrap up this block, you both mentioned some things: abortion, immigration, education, inflation. All of these things impact. Now, both of you are in states where there's a heavy collegiate population. And oftentimes, and I remember when the presidential election was going on, there was this big issue about how do students vote? Do they get absentee ballot? Can they vote because they're temporarily in that state? Do they need to go home to vote? In each of your states, for just a few moments, Pastor JT, I'll start with you. What does that look like? Say, for example, for a student that goes to Texas Southern, how are they voting while they're at campus and they don't live in the state of Texas, or they're out of their county?
Got you. It would be literally at that point, you know, you could do an absentee voting because you are a student. And it would take the responsibility of the parent or the student to kind of coordinate to be able to get that ballot in and to get that ballot mailed back in if you have not done an official change of address. But if you have done the official change of address, and then in Texas, there has been a new law that has been put in place. You have to register to vote 30 days before the voting cycle begins. So you would have had to register to vote with your new address information and hopefully would have received your voter's registration card to be able to participate in this upcoming election.
So today being election day, this is super intriguing for me, because can students no longer in either of your states utilize their student ID? Because if I'm 18 and I never got a driver's license, I don't have two forms of ID. So that means I only have my student ID or my high school ID wherever I came from. How are we helping students navigate? And I'll do Dr. Tierney, because Dr. Tierney, you were in that collegiate space and still are in that college space. What's happened there?
So this is where, of course, we will have to go visit our good friend Google to see if a student ID, because there has been so many changes, if a student ID will still suffice as a second form of ID in addition to a driver's license, passport, social security card. So I'm not certain there, and I don't want to give any misinformation, but definitely, it is definitely something that the conversations happen early and often on college campuses here in North Carolina. Absolutely. Because we do have a huge population of HBCUs and collegiate universities and colleges here. It's definitely a conversation that absolutely happens here. What often happens is that if a student is still considered a regular student, then as Pastor JT said, they would have to vote via absentee ballot. But if they are considered an independent student, where they are no longer considered a dependent of their parents, but they are an independent student, so therefore they have their address is set in accordance with the college or with the city that they live in, then they would be able to vote in that election for that county. They would not have to vote absentee ballot. But again, I'm not sure if a student ID would suffice. Something that I would always encourage students to do would be to just get an ID. Just get an ID. It doesn't have to be a driver's license. If they do not, feel comfortable taking the driver's test, to go to the DMV and just get an ID, a picture ID with their picture on it, so that can be utilized, so that, again, there's nothing that'll be stopping them when they get ready to go to the polls.
Absolutely. A state ID is probably a very good form of identification to have as a student, especially if you're living away from home or on campus. Thank you both for the information that you shared. When we come back after the break, I want to talk about, how do you get to the poll? It is the day of election. You are now deciding, after watching this show, that you're going to get out to the poll. So let's talk about that for a moment when we're back after the break.
I am Letitia Hill Gadet, owner of Adendorf Laboratories. In America, our freedom of speech and the right to peacefully protest is a wonderful thing, but faith without works is dead. Will you take souls to the polls? If you don't vote, all of your activities were done in vain. I am an ordained minister, a presiding elder in the AME Zion Church, a wife, a mother. I am spending my time and my resources to encourage you to vote.
Paid for by Adendorf Laboratories.
We've got to stand up. Republicans are banning abortion rights, tearing down democracy, blocking progress. But when Democrats stand together, we win. Because we voted, Democrats stood up for Black lives, voting to ban police chokeholds, stood up for Black women, putting one on the Supreme Court, stood up for our families, lowering cost of health care and prescriptions and capping insulin, and stood up for millions by slashing student debt. This November, let's stand up together and keep making progress.
It's time to know your rights. If someone is questioning your right to vote, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE. For more information, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
When we invest in ourselves, we all shine. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, there is a lot at stake here as it relates to voting in this midterm election. I want to talk to our guest today about, how do people get to the polls? Because oftentimes it's not easy. And I know that work can be an issue for some people when you're trying to figure out, do I take off a half a day? Is it my legal right to be able to go out and vote? Just how do we navigate getting to the poll? And sometimes, guys, it is these hurdles, just mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. It's these kinds of hurdles that keep people from getting to the polls on the day of election. Let's unpack that for just a moment.
Yeah. Well, I know here in the city of Houston, there has been a concerted effort to ensure that there are no barriers as it relates to being able to get to the polls. I know Metro Bus, our public transit system here, they are offering free rides to the polls. I know that there are a lot of churches that are utilizing their church vans and church buses to get people in the good church statement to and fro. But I believe, going back to what Dr. Tierney said, we Google everything, even to the standpoint, if you don't even want to type, you can talk to your phone. We have your preference, Siri or Alexa, and I know that they will be able to give you some information. But I know that, even if you just ask a simple question, how can I get to the polls? There are so many different ways, but I believe that goes to the voter or the person that is engaged enough to want to find every resource that's available to be able to make sure that their voice is heard and that their vote is cast.
Dr. T.
Yeah. And here in North Carolina, I'm not sure if they still do this, but I know that the bus system was providing free rides to people to be able to go to the polls to vote, in addition to the number of community organizations, like you said, churches that are also providing rides for people to go to the polls, to be picked up and taken to the polls and, brought back home. So there are a number of resources that are offered by either your city or by the organizations and community activist groups that are in your city that will be able to help you get to the polls. And yes, Google, if you're not sure of one, or if one hasn't, because a lot of them don't necessarily have the funds to run commercials or ads, so we won't necessarily know about them. But if you just Google, plenty will come up. And all you have to do is just click the link, find the one that works, best for you, and, offer. The thing that I really want, the thing I really want people to understand is that there are more resources out there, than maybe we even are aware of. It's easy to say, oh, well, they're not doing that, or, oh, I can't do that, or I can't, it's easy to say that, but there are way, 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 way more assistance and help, that's provided than what we even know of, or even that we capitalize on. So take the time, Google, find these resources, ask a friend if they can take you, to your polling location, but definitely just seek these resources out, because they are definitely out there.
So when we think about how we get to the polls, it's very interesting, because I remember, people would ride their bicycles to the poll. And in 2020, Uber began a program where they would give people opportunity to get free rides to the poll. And in 2022, Uber, Lyft, and several others are doing the same. But not only that, they're offering 50% off for people who want to use their scooters, the ride share and the bikes. So can you just imagine people, getting on one of those electric scooters and riding around town? Because I've seen them in so many colors. I wish that people, if you're going to take a scooter, from Uber, Lyft, or one of the other organizations that has them, send us pictures, tag us. We want to see you going to the polls. I think that one of the things that we often forget is how to be creative and innovative. And being able to get to the polls. So not only getting to the polls is an issue or a concern, but there has been some contention around polling places. So Pastor JT, talk to us about Souls to the Polls and church's ability on today or any other Sunday, in advance, because we're talking about future voting as well as election day. What role do churches play in having polling places for people to vote?
Churches play a significant role, as they always have, and especially in our community. I don't think that there's any elected official that has been elected that has not attended a Black Sunday morning service. Because historically, that was our epicenter. Everything started at the church. Even if you think about the civil rights movement, that's why you had so many pastors or clergy that in the 50s and 60s that was leading the charge, because those were our community leaders, because we had not yet ascended to the place where we had African Americans that could actually sit in political seats. To be presidents of companies, CEOs, and things of that nature. So all we had was Pastor Jenkins at Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church. And so they would galvanize their members, and then their members now attach themselves with the millennials of that time. And I always say every generation had a group of millennials, those college students. So you think about SNCC, you think about the LCLC, all of those groups that are our fraternities, our sororities, that we have seen seemingly like the black and white pictures of them marching for civil rights. But that was the hub. That's how it happened. So now fast forward in 2022, as much as people may want to distance themselves from the church or have so many negative things to maybe say about religious organizations, the church is still that place that you're going to find the majority of African Americans in a group setting. So churches play a huge, huge piece. There are several churches in the city of Houston that are actually polling locations. So it makes it easy for them and their parishioners to vote, as well as all of our churches are in communities. So it makes it easy for those community residents to be able to come to the church. Now, as you mentioned about souls to the polls, that's a huge initiative that kind of happens collectively with several churches and ministries. And I know we're doing, or we did a huge initiative here in the city of Houston for this particular voting cycle, where we brought churches and denominations together, and we actually caravanned. It made me feel like we were marching on Selma. I felt like the power of my ancestors come on me. You know, I was about to break out and say, "We shall overcome." It just felt good. But we all came together, and it was after church. And so you had that spirit that I believe carried us to the polls. So we made sure that our voices was heard. And so I echoed that again. There is nothing like the power of the Black church. The Black church is still alive and well, and that's why you still see so many politicians, community leaders that will not miss an opportunity to come to the African American church, because they are of the belief, the parishioner is that if my pastor allows this person to stand in their pulpit at their point, then that must means that my pastor believes in them, and this is an endorsement. And that means that if my pastor believes in this person, I need to believe in them too. And so I believe every pastor should be a significant role in the political process to ensure that those that you have watch over, have care over, are using their voice and following the leadership of yours.
Absolutely. I want to wrap up this segment because I want to spend quite a bit of time on our next topic. When we come back after the break, Headspace.com talked a little bit about election anxiety and stress. Oh, yes, it's a thing. When we come back after the break, let's talk about how we deal with pre, present, and post anxiety at the polls. We'll be back after the break.
Exercise your right to vote. If the lines are long or you're getting turned away, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE. For more information, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
I am Letitia Hill Gadet, owner of Adendorf Laboratories. In America, our freedom of speech and the right to peacefully protest is a wonderful thing, but faith without works is dead. Will you take souls to the polls? If you don't vote, all of your activities were done in vain. I am an ordained minister, a presiding elder in the AME Zion Church, a wife, a mother. I am spending my time and my resources to encourage you to vote.
Paid for by Adendorf Laboratories.
When we invest in ourselves, we're investing in what's next for all of us. Growing, creating, making moves that move us all forward. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
We've got to stand up. Republicans are banning abortion rights, tearing down democracy, blocking progress. But when Democrats stand together, we win. Because we voted, Democrats stood up for Black lives, voting to ban police chokeholds, stood up for Black women, putting one on the Supreme Court, stood up for our families, lowering cost of health care and prescriptions and capping insulin, and stood up for millions by slashing student debt. This November, let's stand up together and keep making progress.
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, there's a lot at stake when it comes to being able to vote, getting to the polls to vote, casting your vote so that your voice can be heard. But there is some stress and anxiety that comes along with getting to the polls, being at the polls, and going to the polls. I want to talk to Dr. Tierney for a moment about that, because when we talk about stress and the way that it affects us mentally, emotionally, socially, it can really wreak havoc on us. Dr. Tierney, talk about stress with us in a way that people can understand and identify when they're having a little bit of rise up and anxiety, because it presents itself in different forms for many people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Stress is definitely one of those things that, unfortunately, in our society today, we've kind of normalized it. So for a lot of us, we don't even know necessarily when we're feeling the stress or that we're under stress. We may do things to kind of cope with the stress, not even knowing that that's what we're doing. So sometimes if we're feeling stressed or anxious, we may find ourselves fidgeting, quite a bit, or we might find ourselves talking quite a bit, or talking more fast or rapidly, about whatever it is that's causing a stress, or maybe something else that maybe doesn't even, attach to the thing, but we're just finding ourselves just needing to kind of talk. We may also find ourselves becoming very tired, weary, sleepy, wanting to just take a nap. We may find it present itself in our bodies. So if you start to feel like tension through your neck and through your shoulders, tension in your lower back or in your legs, you may be clenching your muscles because of that stress and that anxiety. So it's really important that we start to make sure that we're taking the cues from our bodies, cues from our actions to let us know when we are experiencing any type of stress or anxiousness, or like we're bracing for impact. And when we notice that, the first thing that we have to do is first identify, okay, why am I so stressed about this situation? What about this situation is causing me stress? And so since it's election day and we're talking about the stress and overwhelm and anxiousness that comes with going to the polls, that's where you have to stop and say, okay, am I stressed because there's going to be a crowd? And I don't do well in crowds. Am I stressed because I don't know, I'm supposed to be Democrat, but I don't know any of the Democrats. So how do I know what to do when I get there? Or are they going to ask me for something that, or maybe I was just, a previous felon. So can I still vote? And is there going to be police there? Or, these are real anxieties, real fears that people go to the polls with or experience before going to the polls that can become a hurdle, to stop them from going to the polls. So this is where we have to first say, all right, what is the best way for me to vote? If I know that being around large crowds is going to cause me stress and anxiousness, or I'm starting to feel it well up, just even thinking about going to the polls, this is where you make a plan to say, all right, I'm going to the poll early, or I'm going to early vote, or I'm going to vote via absentee ballot. If you're not sure if you are going to be stopped at the polls, harassed at the polls, what you're going to need at the polls, this is where you may invite a friend to go to the poll with you. This is where you Google and say, okay, what do I need to have with me to go to the polls to ensure that I'm not stopped, at the polls? Do whatever it is that you need to do for you to mitigate that stress and that anxiousness, because what we don't want to happen is for us to go into shutdown. Too much stress, too much anxiousness, too much overwhelm will cause us to shut down, and what we don't want to do is hit that wall of shutdown and say, well, I'm just not going to, I'm just not going to deal with it, or I'm just going to avoid it, because then what you'll be doing is setting up a dynamic that looks something like voting equals stress. So I'm not doing it, and that's definitely what we don't want you, to do. There are a number of ways that we can address the stress, deal with the stress properly so that you can still let your voice be heard. But the number one thing is just to realize when you start to having stress, why are you having that stress? And then let's find some ways to mitigate that stress by taking one of these different type of actions that'll still get you to the polls in a less stress way as best as can be possible.
Yeah, trying to figure out how to mitigate stress can oftentimes be really difficult. The American Psychological Association literally talks about that and how it polls people close to election time just to see how they're feeling. So Pastor JT, when you get these calls from these unknown numbers, when in these small towns that you didn't even know existed, when people come knocking at your door to talk to you about whether or not you're getting to the polls, and of course we know that after election day on today, there are going to be all these post calls and all of these post surveys of people coming around. Did you vote? How did it go? Et cetera, et cetera. Do we ever release ourselves from this type of anxiety of always being queried when it comes to elections?
I don't think we do. And I think that may be to our detriment, because it's always a vote, or it's always an election, and there's always an issue. It's kind of almost like, I believe that we needed to have a moment to unplug during quarantine, because, if you were like me and most Americans, man, during quarantine, we didn't have nothing to do but, watch TV. And depending on what you watched, it could have created some things in you that you are living in now that you didn't even know was happening. So I believe that our anxiety levels increased. I believe that our fear increased. Even thinking about the racial tension that was going on in America, that was at the forefront during that 2020, 2021 time. So now we look at it in 2022, it has increased. And so I think, to your point, to your question, I don't necessarily think that we do. Would I suggest that we do? Yes, because I think too much of anything is bad. I think that we need to have some way to decompress, some way to release what we have received, and maybe having an opportunity to replace it with something else. I believe that is going to be something that will help you not to have stress overload, because the fear is that you would wear your stressors out so much that you become lethargic at the next voting cycle, or you remove yourself and engagement that once was there is removed completely.
All right, so it's election night. What are y'all doing for election night watch coverage? Because I know we sit in front of that TV and we're watching all these different channels and we're seeing the numbers go up and go down. What are you doing on election night?
I'm going to sleep.
You're not going to stay up and watch the poll numbers? You don't want to see it?
No, and here's why. So exactly to what Pastor JT said, if we can find ourselves continuing to stay unlocked in this anxiousness cycle. Mm-hmm. So my mitigating of the stress, the anxiousness, it starts even before. So I don't, how we see on the TV, all of the mudslinging, the slander ads and the commercials and the text messages. And I put horse blinders on and I don't pay attention to any of that. It's not that I'm not informed, but I'm choosing where to put my focus. Okay. Then I intentionally, who are the candidates? What are the issues? Let me look at their platforms. Let me be informed, but in a way where I can digest the information and it's not just coming at me out of a fire hydrant and I'm just trying to keep up, but I get the information in the way that I can handle, in a way that I can wrap my mind around it to make an informed decision. Then I go to the polls, I do my civic duty, I get my sticker, I encourage others to do the same. I'll take people to the polls, I'll do what needs to be done. And then that's where I've done my duty. I will wake up on the next morning and find out who won. I don't sit and labor over it, watch the numbers, watch the ticker, because that's going to make that anxious bug in me just want to go da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's going to make me tired for the next day, which I will then be impacted by the things that I need to continue to do in my own life, in my home, in my business. So I go to sleep so that I can make sure that I keep my anxiety, stress levels under control. And that's just my way of navigating, and disconnecting from it. Because like we said, there's going to be another election cycle. There's going to be a presidential election. There's going to be another midterm. And if I constantly stay plugged into it that way, or feeling like, oh, my person didn't win, no, I did my civic duty. At the end of the day, God is the one that's in control of it. So let him do his job and I'm going to sleep, period.
Pastor JT.
Well, being in Harris County, which is one of the largest counties in America, talked to a poll worker yesterday and said that they probably won't have the official numbers until 6 hours after the polls close. We have 150 different issues that's on the ballot. So I have been invited to several different watch parties, and different candidates are having different things. So considering the numbers may not come in until 6 hours later, I'm going to take a page from the Level Up Coach, throwing away all these invitations I'm going to sleep. I'll see them tomorrow morning and figure out who won.
Absolutely. Thank you for your words of inspiration and encouragement. It's election day, and whatever it is you're going to do, now is the time. You still got time, several hours, in fact, in this day to still get out and vote. When we're back after the break, I'll bring my reflection.
Know your voting rights. If you are unsure where to vote or don't know if your polling location has changed, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE. For more information, call or text 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
When we invest in ourselves, we all shine. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
We've got to stand up. Republicans are banning abortion rights, tearing down democracy, blocking progress. But when Democrats stand together, we win. Because we voted, Democrats stood up for Black lives, voting to ban police chokeholds, stood up for Black women, putting one on the Supreme Court, stood up for our families, lowering cost of health care and prescriptions and capping insulin, and stood up for millions by slashing student debt. This November, let's stand up together and keep making progress.
Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. As you can tell, your vote is your voice. Get out today, cast your vote. Let the world know what you think, how you feel about the issues. But in the midst of doing that, also take time to step back and breathe. Do your due diligence. Even if you're just now deciding to go to the polls, go to vote411.org. Find out what the issues are. If you haven't done that already, get your ride share together. Call Uber, call Lyft, get a scooter. Do whatever it is that you need to do to get out to vote today. Yes, today, get out and vote today. It's a matter of importance. No matter how you feel about elections, whether you're on the left, the right, whether you're Democrat or Republican or independent, or if you're green, it doesn't matter. But where you cast your vote does. Be a part of the civic duty and the participation process. Thank you all for watching, and happy Election Day. Bye now.
When we invest in ourselves, we all shine. Together, we are Black beyond measure.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate Black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.